Go ahead, Commissioner. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what your men and women do, looking after the juveniles that unfortunately find their way into our detention system. But we know that you are working well with your staff to try to provide them with the education they need, and also try to provide them with some corrections in that behavior so that they'll be productive adults in the state of Georgia. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and we are grateful that you provide the tools so that we can do the job to keep the kids and get those kids that find themselves on this side of justice reacclimated and rehabilitated so that they can be successful taxpayers. You'll find our section, Mr. Chair, in section number 31, and it's the governor's recommendation, and we enjoy the opportunity to present our budget to you, and we will start at 31.1.5 on your tracking sheets, and that's to provide for our youth in our care the determination of competency, and that's 1.8 mil. That's to stay in line with the Senate Bill 175 that passed in 2017, and that total is 1.865880, and that's for those beds that we have available through contract with our provider, so that when the judges have those opportunities that a kid needs to be in a confined bed and not in a juvenile setting, waiting the disposition of that case. So that's what that monies are for. The next item is item 31.1.6. This is a 2.5 per diem increase in our child care providers. It's $531,810. It gets in line with DHS and DFACS in those child care providers. And this is a recommendation that comes out of the governor's budget also. The next item is 31.3.6 on your tracking sheet. And we are fortunate that we have educators in our system that specialize in science and math, and the monies that's set aside, the $12,953, are for 3 of our teachers that have received that certification that specializes in those line items. Mr. Chair and committee, the next item is 31.4.5. It's the Wilkes RYDC analyzer of $650,000. Wilkes facility opened up this year, and this is to analyze those funds to give us a full 12-month in our fiscal year. Again, that's $650,000, and it's the analyzer for our Wilkes, which replaced the Sandersville RYDC that was built in the early 60s. The next item, Mr. Chair and committee, is items 31.4.6. It's $3,503,472, and that's the Cadwell RYDC. This item will be opening, or this facility would be open the end of the year. It's scheduled to be open. It's a 60, going to entail 60 new staffing. Total staffing for that facility would be 116. It's a 56-bed facility. It will replace the Eastman RYDC that was on our master schedule back several years when we first started this. The Eastman facility was built in the 60s also, and this is the $3,503,472 that's going to get us to where we need to be. The last items, Mr. Chair and committee, is our capital budget request. It is going to be found in the items of 50.2.3, 46, and 47. The first item is $2 million for minor facility repair and sustainability. We have to have those funds so that when there's minor infractions that's going to take a short term to repair, That's the $2 million. And then the next item is for the major improvements and renovations. This will entail those major renovations that's needed to maintain our safety and secure facilities, as well as provide for our maintenance that's ongoing with our CCTVs and or other items that we see that those wear and tear happens at those particular locations. That's for all of our locations throughout this state. Mr. Chair and committee, that concludes my presentation, and I stand ready for any questions if you have any.
Commissioner, thank you very much. We have a couple of questions. First, in dealing with the 31.1.5, this is a new program that you have installed, and so we will have a better sense of the actual usage by the end of this next fiscal year. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And then the other one is that in dealing with the detention, the Caldwell Regional Youth Detention Center, the expenses here are, this is not one time. This is an ongoing base budget add for security, education. This is the personnel, their training and preparations to take on the facility. Is that correct?
That is correct, sir.
Okay. And then in the state, several years ago, I think 10 years ago, started a new plan for how to incrementally take out the obsolete facilities, antiquated, obsolete facilities, and roll them out of commission, if you will, and put in newer facilities that are unfortunately hardened to accept the youth that we're now accepting, given that we have a CHINS diversion program with our juvenile justice program, but also to modernize it so that they're safer, they're more effective, they can provide the services that are needed for the youth. And my understanding is that we're working through that. How far along are we, and when will we complete in that overhaul?
In that entire facility was the master plan for our regional youth development campuses, and we have two more locations. One is in Waycross, Georgia, and the other one is in the Dalton area. Those are the two that I know that needs to be replaced, that's on the master schedule that was formulated some 10 years ago. And during the Governor Deal's administration, we was able to tackle a lot of those locations year after year after year. And the other item is that, Mr. Chair, and we're in the process of working on that now, is for our 7 YDC, which is our long care facilities that are in those same type of shapes as it relates to how do we house kids and why do we utilize the old traditional linear style of facilities. So we need to take a look at those on a master schedule and on a master plan, and those have yet to be presented to the governor's office. So I yield to present those at this time.
Okay. Questions from members of the committee? I have one from Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. Mine is a general question, and certainly the bricks and mortar is so very, very necessary. You got to have it to operate and function. Now, you've been in this business a while.
About 33 years.
Wow. You're an old man. Go get to
Yes, sir.
But you've been at it. I want to know, you've seen 33 years of kids coming in and going out. Tell me, on today's young people that you're having to house, tell me a little bit about the future. Sometimes I get nervous when I see, do you see any light at the end of the tunnel?
There is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a freight train. It's a more robust kid. You got to understand the children that show up in our facilities, Mr. Williams, is those kids that have not been amenable to a traditional family setting, a traditional school, a traditional playground, a traditional community. And they find themselves amongst people that have taken advantage of their upbringing. And so they have and live in a life of disruption, destruction. And when we look at those kids and they show up in our beloved juvenile justice, and we started the rehabilitation programs, we start the educational programs, knowing that they have mental health issues, knowing that they are roughly 3.5 to 4 years behind on that grade, on the reading. And we pour to them opportunities of hope, opportunities to be successful, and to provide for them and to tell them and show them that someone loves them. I'm reminded of kids that when we started this several years ago, started looking at our way that we deliver education, and now looking at the way that kids transition from our beloved DJJ into having a full scholarship, whether it's academic scholarships or art scholarships. We partner with our technical colleges and universities so that those kids don't have to go back to that same corruption, that same environment in which they come from. A lot of times when you look at that, to get to your question, is how does the kids leave us? We talked about the way that the kids come to us with the juvenile justice reforms when I stood in front of you and talked about how juvenile justice reform does work in Georgia and how we are changing the kid and how we're going to transition that kid roughly 2.5 years of confinement where it used to be 5 years. And now they're 2.5 years and going to be focusing on all of those rehabilitative programs and how they're going to transition from our secure confinement back into our robust probation, and keeping those kids on a juvenile track and not necessarily an adult track, and provide for them the tools that they can have so that they can transition back into a traditional school or school of choice. That's the type of kids that we have that's coming from us back out in the community. So you see a bright star that's coming at you. Now, we're going to lose some to the system based on the seriousness of what got them involved in the trouble. But for the better part, the kids that are getting the treatment or not coming to us because of juvenile justice reform, and we said years ago how those kids that wound up with us are more hardcore. Some are not amenable to justice, and that's why we have the competency issues. Mental health you see that is on the rise. You see drug abuse is on the rise. You see teen pregnancy on the rise. You see all those type things, but yet there is hope. And that hope is where all of us can take part and say, what do we want our Georgians to look like? And we can honestly say that the more that the kids get involved in our system, they leave us better. And that better is what we all want, to where we can extend that olive branch of welcome to the kids. But here's the challenge. The community's got to be ready to embrace that child, because he or she is changed when they come back. But is the community ready to receive them? Has the community changed? And that's the underlying reason will we accept that person. Of course, through the governor's office, have banned the box and provide for a job skill. And you and I both know if you provide a job and or a school education to a child or an adult within 30 days of release, the chances of them going deeper in the system is slim to none. But if you get it mixed up, they're going to come right back.
Representative Williams, we call him chairman of Liberty County, so I appreciate the question, and thank you. There are no other questions for you, Commissioner, and we appreciate you being here.
Yes, sir. Take care, and thank you for everything.
Thank you, and thank you for also to the department for providing that opportunity for a second chance to be that star. We appreciate the men and women that are doing that for us. Thank you.
Much.
We have the Department of Law. Attorney General Chris Carr is here with his staff. We welcome him here, and as he comes to the podium, I was looking at the website and I noticed that you now have a new ad on there that's demand an end.
Yes, sir.
And I don't the double entente there is not missed on me. it really needs to be in the demand. And I think that's also what it's supposed to mean as well. But, you know, when what we're talking about here is human trafficking, both for labor and for sex. This is an epidemic, and I know that your office has taken a lead in that, in fighting that battle. Also, the opioid epidemic, trafficking of humans and trafficking of drugs go hand in hand, and so we applaud the efforts that your office is making to try to end the demand.
Well, thank you,
both.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and that's an interesting program because obviously when we're talking about human trafficking and we work so closely with our law enforcement partners, state, federal, and local, and when you're dealing with this issue of human trafficking, obviously you got to go after those that are supplying children. You got to rehabilitate those children that have gotten involved in this life because it's average age is a 12 to 14-year-old girl. It's not just girls, but that's the average age. So you've got to be able to provide alternatives. But then the demand side. So that's where Demand and End has come from, and we're working with the GBI. We're working with Street Grace, which is a great nonprofit here in Atlanta, and other state attorneys general around the country, and we're spearheading that effort. So very proud of that. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing that up. And, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to start our presentation with line 33.1.6. The others I know are statewide. If that's all right with you, we can start there. Increased funds for one paralegal at $67,101 that we had gotten in the governor's recommendation. And let me just start by saying thanks to you, to the legislature, and the governor for the support that you gave the Department of Law a couple of years ago for an increase in salaries for attorneys. That was critical. We are greatly appreciative for that. What we have focused on this year is the support staff, and we understand that budgets are tight, and we are very grateful for the governor putting the paralegal in his budget, and we would ask that you support his recommendation, but also build on that by providing 2 additional paralegals. And let me just very briefly say where they would go and why they are important. We have needs in 3 areas. The Solicitor General's section, which, as you know, is a new unit that strategizes on the appeals for the state. It is it has no paralegal support at this time and has a critical need given the volume of high-profile and complex appellate cases that it has. And it oversees, as I mentioned, all the appeals, Court of Appeals, Georgia Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, 11th Circuit in the department, working with our other divisions together to leverage their expertise. So need in their division. Second, in the business and finance section, we have no paralegal support there either. And we have a critical need devoted to litigation support because this section handles much of the representation of state agencies and authorities in contract and procurement related disputes. And we have a very low utilization of SAGs in that area. And many of these disputes and transactions involve significant dollar amounts to the state and are against parties that are represented by large firms that have teams of attorneys and paralegals. And the third area would be a split position between general litigation and criminal justice. We are implementing, Mr. Chairman, a new case management system. General litigation is going to go first in that implementation, so there will be a massive increased demand for scanning and converting from paper files to electronic files. And then on the criminal justice side, similarly, we have a position that requires logging in hundreds of time-sensitive pieces of mail each day, and there is no dedicated paralegal there as well. So we appreciate your support and would ask your consideration for an increase of 2 paralegals.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. A question for you. Could you speak on the progress that your department is making relevant to the monitoring of your SAGs and their productivity, their competency, and the cost associated therewith?
Yes, sir, and I appreciate it. Thank you, and I want to thank the chair. We have had some great conversations over the last year as it relates to this issue, which is critically important because we got to make sure that we are spending taxpayer dollars wisely. And I would say that we are grateful for the service that our SAGs provide our department, and we have an obligation to make sure that we're monitoring and overseeing it, and we are, but the conversation we've had have been very, very helpful. And, Mr. Chairman, as you know, there are 3 basic areas where we will do evaluation on the front end before we make the appointment. while the work is being done, and then a back-end evaluation of how the work was performed. And as we have discussed, this has been a great opportunity. We've reached out to the National Association of Attorneys General to see how offices will handle their evaluations, and we have reached out to our clients and to others, and it's been a good process. As you know, we have SAGs in a number of different areas, everything from water wars to Department of Transportation or DFACS and child support, which are two areas that I'll mention. The one-offs we've talked about, and obviously we are taking those on a case-by-case basis, but where we have two major areas would be Department of Transportation and then DFACS and child support. And I'll start with DOT. We've had, because this is a process that I believe involves both the client and our department. The client oversees, we oversee the work day to day. They will pay for the lawyer, as you're aware, Mr. Chairman. So we've got that obligation. We've been in conversations with Department of Transportation, with Commissioner McMurray, with their in-house counsel as well. We are looking for more data and metrics, particularly in that area, that we can implement. We are on a day-to-day basis, on a case-by-case basis. We've got two lawyers in particular, Mary Jo Volkert and Wright Banks, who have been with the department a long time. So they have that longitudinal experience of being able to look at when the bills come in, do they seem out of line? Are they too high? Is it taking a lawyer particularly long, a lot longer to do a particular thing? So we've got some good longitudinal experience there as well, but where I try to identify working with the client and working internally to make sure that we have the best data that we have there. Child support and DFACS is different. It's a lot harder to put those lawyers and the metrics into a particular box because it's so much more reputational, and those issues are a lot different as we're dealing with the state's most vulnerable children. But what we have done is we have reached out, we've sent out to all of our DFACS SAGs asking them ways that we could implement more metrics, that we could implement a better system for them, feedback from our office as well as from the community, from the judges as well. We have talked to juvenile court judges. We have solicited the input of community leaders. We are actually going to come to the legislature. We had a conversation and make sure that our friends in the House and the Senate can also help us with feedback, both positive as well as negative. Because that's oftentimes we will hear anecdotally that we have an issue, maybe not with a SAG, but we may have it with one of our clients, with one of the individuals that's working with the children there. So we want to make sure we have good feedback, both with our lawyers and with the agency. And we do think our agency clients should be a part of it as well, because I do think it's a partnership. I do think that where an agency's had a good experience, that should weigh in as well. However, if we have reason to believe that the lawyer is not doing what they're supposed to do, whether it relates to fees, whether it relates to ethics, anything along those lines, because particularly when it relates to child support and DFACS, we're talking about children, and we've got a higher level, I think, obligation there as well.
Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. There are no questions from members of the committee, and we appreciate you being here today, and thank you for the information you've provided.
I greatly appreciate the support of the committee. Thank you all very much.
All right, next on the agenda, we have the Public Defenders Council. Brian Tyson is the Executive Director. I know that he has been under the weather, but he has joined us today. Don't shake his hand. Yeah, elbow bump, fist bump.
That's right. All those will work, Mr. Chairman. Yes,
Terry
sir.
Rayford, thank you for being here. Yes, ma'am. Good to see you. You can shake her hand, right? Okay, good. All right, good.
Although all of her children, unfortunately, have the flu right now as well, so they want to be careful. Just saying.
Okay. All right. So we'll turn to their page now. I think that's the last set, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Section 37, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman,
So the next
thank you.
page. Let's see here, 37, we have Public Defenders. That's on page 20 of your package. Go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. And I thought that as this is Governor Deal's last budget, it might be worth a look back for the then Public Defender Standards Council when Governor Deal first took office in 2011 and where the agency was at that point, just to briefly recap where we were. Those of you who were here will remember that we were funded at a level that was not really sufficient for us to meet our statutory mission, and we were in trouble in a lot of ways as an agency. We were still relatively new, We were also funded at a level significantly under the collections from the Indigent Defense Fund that was there at the time. And where we were as an agency was a full hiring freeze. Everybody was pretty much frozen, and all new hires had to be approved through Atlanta. Any lawyer that left, they had to be replaced by a lawyer that we hired, regardless of experience, at $39,000 a year, lowest possible price we could get. And that led to a slowdown in a lot of ways, because prosecutors can only prosecute as fast as public defenders can defend. And so when you have a less number of public defenders in a particular jurisdiction, there's an impact on the speed of what's happening in the criminal justice system. The agency was being sued. We didn't have a lot of policies and procedures in place at the agency at the time, but we did have one, which was what to do when someone showed up with a new lawsuit against the agency at the central office. And as a result of those lawsuits, we had multiple settlements. There were state appropriations that had to be made pursuant to those. And we had a significant problem with certainty as to spending. Conflict spending was uncertain every year. Death penalty spending was uncertain every year. The agency couldn't tell, you as a committee couldn't tell the legislature what our costs were going to be, and those costs spiraled every year along the way. We also didn't really have anything in the way of training. We had someone who was nominally the training director, but she was instructed, you have no budget, figure out a way to train lawyers, and that was about the end of the story on that. So you take what the agency looked like when Governor Deal first took office in 2011 to where we are today, and you almost wouldn't recognize the difference between the two. The governor referred to a seismic shift that's happened over the issues of criminal justice reform, and public defenders in the indigent defense system in our state has been a big part of that along the way. This year, due to the support of the governor, of this committee in particular, and y'all's work, we don't require any mid-year budget adjustments. That was the first time we haven't needed one of those since the financial crisis. We didn't need governor's emergency funds this year. We're on track with our budget this year and able to fulfill our mission. Our death penalty and conflict costs are stable and predictable. We can represent to you each year what that's going to look like and what that's going to cost. We're able to provide lawyers for people and make sure that their cases are moving along. We've stopped being sued about agency operations. The last consent decree we have related to the agency's operations expires in a little bit over 4 months, so we're almost to the end of that. We've had professionalized our agency operations and filled our statutory positions. And then there's the significant things that this committee really has focused on with the governor on the number of juvenile positions that we have with the prosecutors. So now we have 25 positions for juvenile defenders. There's 25 juvenile prosecutors, and those have been especially significant because over the years our county partners have picked up that load that was a state responsibility, and having state-funded juvenile defenders has been a huge help for us as an agency in working with our county partners in providing the right to counsel. The move towards pay parity in terms of the payment to APDs and ADAs on the same pay schedule based on experience has also been a huge help for us, particularly in rural recruitment and retention. We were in a scenario where we were constantly trading lawyers back and forth between DA offices and CPD offices. And having now today all of our state-paid ADAs and state-paid APDs on the same pay schedule has been a huge benefit to both stability and to best be able to recruit more qualified lawyers, particularly to rural areas, because we can promise them what that pay is going to look like and give them some certainty over time. Our training is funded and ongoing. Thanks to the support of this committee and the work over the years with the governor's office, we now have our training conference that's annual. We had over 400 public defenders this last year getting trained and zeroed in on what is the role of the public defender in the criminal justice system, and that our role is the client, and we're all about our clients. And we also, for this year, had our first ever conflict contractor training, where we focused on those private lawyers who work with us and helping them drive up the quality of service that we're able to deliver to our clients and making sure that we're ensuring that quality control along the way. So in short, when you take the increase in funding, the professionalization of the agency, we've led us to where we are today, which is an agency that is an effective pull on that tug-of-war rope, that is able to serve as the red team effectively and test the state's theory and make sure the system works. Over the last 3 years actually, I've now completed visiting all 43 judicial circuits where we operate. And that's been quite a journey, and I've seen a lot, but it's also helped me realize how difficult it is to get lawyers in a lot of places across the state because they are difficult to reach. It's hard to live. But what I found in every office where we operate is men and women who are ready to do the job, who are focused on serving our clients, who are well-trained and are ready to serve the people that we are charged with serving as part of our mission. So I want to thank all of you, thank the governor and the others who've made such a critical part of making this a reality for us as a state. As you'll see for our track sheet this year, we're not really asking for anything major. We recognize we're part of a big state, and while we as an agency may have needs that are important, there are needs for other agencies that are more urgent this year. We've been in the scenario in the past where our needs have been the most urgent, so we understand what that looks like for other agencies. And so for us, as far as the non-statewide changes, it's just the annualizer for the new APD in the Northeastern Circuit that was added last year, and the accountability court supplements in Lookout Mountain and Oconee. And I know there's been some discussion about how those are going to be handled, and obviously whatever the committee decides as far as the judges and the DAs will be along with that. On the long-term front, I do just want to raise to the committee that the issue of recruitment and retention continues to be our challenge. We're doing everything we can on that front in terms of the videos we did last year, the outreach into the law schools, really trying to build the skill sets that we have to bring people into the agency. But as we have the rural recruitment and retention, that's a challenge, and then replacement of people as we continue to hit that 10-year mark for public service loan forgiveness, people investing in the state retirement system. This year in our January transition into law practice program, which is our newest lawyers, we had 62 new assistant public defenders, which is great, but that's a very large class for us. That means we lost 62 people with experience and having to replace a significant number. So seeing trends like that over time, we want to make sure we're not losing out on being able to recruit and retain really quality folks to be able to serve our clients along the way. We're also continuing to push into looking at some social work support and how we can continue to support the accountability court structures and the other things that are in place to meet the underlying needs of people who have mental health issues or substance abuse issues. So we'll continue to look into that into the future. But that's our report for this year, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Tyson. Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Brian, for what you've done and your team. I was here. I recently got into the legislature when we'd come out of court fights, and we did the original appropriations to set it up and properly fund it. We never did get where we said we would go, and so it was a struggle. But hats off to you all, in particular the last 7.5 years under Governor Deal, who has done a great job of making this system work. It was a lot of kicking the can down the road and pats on the head. But you all work function better now than I've ever seen you function. I got a chance to go into several of the offices all over the state. You all are doing a good job.
Thank you so much, Representative Williams. I'm proud of the work that the men and women do across the state, and I tell our public defenders all the time, I know they're doing a good job, and when I stand up and say they're doing a great job, no one can say that they're not, because people see the quality that we provide along the way. So thank you very much.
Well, Representative Williams, you have not had a small part of that, because as a member of this committee, longer serving than anyone on this, I think anyone here except for Mr. Green, is that right? Mm-hmm. For Chairman Green, then, I think recognition needs to be paid back to you for taking that leadership and working on it and helping work with this committee through these last few years on meeting those expectations, even if it has been delayed. We're just about there. But I do have a question for you, Director Tyson. Last year we awarded the department 54 cars.
Yes, sir.
And if I recall correctly, that there was a representation that would be actually 2 years ago, I think, and that you were expecting to see what that savings would be to the department over time, and I think the projection was around $300,000. Mm-hmm. Could you speak to that savings, where that stands, and what are you seeing as a result of those cars that have now been issued?
Mr. Chairman, I know we've been able to use the cars very extensively across the state, and I know just from the expense reports that I approve that I've seen a decrease in the mileage. I don't have with me a report that shows that decrease, but I'll be happy to get that run and get that to you in the committee so y'all can see that difference.
Please. Okay.
Yes, sir. Be happy to.
Any other questions from members of the committee? And then one last thing, the training session, this was the first one you've had, is that correct?
Second one, actually,
Second
yes.
one you've had.
Mm-hmm.
And how has that been received by your APDs and your PDs?
It's been received very, very well. The prosecutors have had an annual conference for years, and they've been able to focus in on particular issues, new changes in the law, things that have come along the way. So for our assistant public defenders particularly, a lot of them had never met assistant public defenders in other circuits. When they first started out, they might have met somebody at an initial training, but But after that, most of them operated kind of siloed in their own offices going forward. So being able to bring everyone together not only had the benefit of getting common training, we could zero in on our message and our focus on our clients, but it also had the ability for us to connect people with each other, which really helped strengthen the overall, I think, structure of the agency. We're a lot more than the sum of our parts, as I tell our APDs all the time. And there's a real benefit in people learning from each other and understanding how can we improve the functioning of the criminal justice system as a whole, drawing on all the different circuits and sharing that knowledge among each other. So it's been very, very well received, and I really appreciate the committee's commitment and the governor's commitment and others to make that a reality, because it's been a great boon for the agency.
Thank you very much. Thank you both. Ms. Rayford, thank you for being here. Thank you for all the hard work you do on the numbers. And we appreciate that information when you can get that to us. And
Wonderful,
we'll need it quickly.
Okay, we'll get it quickly. Yes,
Thank
sir.
you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next on our agenda is public safety. We have Commissioner Colonel McDonough. Major Jason Johnson, I think, is with him, and Amy Stansel is also here. Good to see you both. If you could, Colonel, we'll go ahead and head it off with you. I think we're on page 22 of your track sheet, which is, if I got that right, let's see.
21 of 23,
20.
Mr. Chairman.
21 of the 23, and then we're section 39 is our track sheet.
Yes, sir. I have you referred down about 2/3 down the page, 39.4.4, and that's providing funds for the second phase of the department's transfer our network management to the Georgia Technology Authority. We've asked for $1,517,871. There's about a $70,000 difference between what we've asked for of OPB and what is in the governor's recommendation. Every now and then OPB's fingers slip on the calculator just a little bit, but I think we can make that work. I'd refer back to fiscal year 2018, where we initially asked for phase one of the project, which was about $416,000. And then we provided to your office two white papers. One was on phase two, and then the actual speed of our connectivity. And the combined cost of that was $1,587,713. So there's about a $70,000 difference there, but we would appreciate it if you would support the governor's recommendation for our phase two of that project. The second is just below it, 39.4.5, and this is increased funds for personal service associated with 175 person trooper school. We appreciate in the amended for this year the money to support that school, and this is the personal service to pay those salaries. Those are the two things that are in the budget. If you'd like, Mr. Chairman, I'd go over our bond issue. And in the governor's recommendation on page 295, under the Department of Public Safety, is $3,350,000 for facility major maintenance and repair statewide. Just a reminder that our agency has 3 divisions in it, 52 patrol posts, almost 90 towers in our communications network, the Capitol Police facility here, and 19 way stations for the Motor Carrier Compliance Division. And that's broken down that we need $1.5 million to replace a boiler at our headquarters. Our headquarters facility was built in 1957, and I think that's the date stamp on the boiler. We also have some renovation in our headquarters that we're asking for $500,000 for. The towers that I mentioned are $350,000, and that's guide wires, painting, fencing, the buildings that are associated with them to protect the equipment. Our way stations, 19 of them, $500,000, and then our patrol posts, $500,000, which is for the bond ask of $3,350,000. Mr. Chairman, that's the sum of fiscal year 19 requests that are in the governor's budget.
Thank you, Colonel. Appreciate that very much. And if the committee will recall, in the amended budget, the request at 39.4.5 for the 75-person trooper school is the same number that we amended the budget. Is that right? Is it 70 or 75?
75 is what they asked for. If you break the numbers down, you'll see that OPB throughout that schedule has taken in the attrition aspect, the kind of the historical that we see, and really what that does is, fund about a 50-man trooper school at graduation. In the past, we've always asked for based upon 75 people. And if we weren't able to graduate 75 people, you remember every year I ask you for a yes to use the attrition money to train new ones. But in this particular calculation, it is specific to that historical attrition, and the governor's recommendation ends up kind of spotting a 50-man graduation rate at the end of that school.
Did the Senate keep that recommendation in there from the House?
Yes, sir.
Good. Did they mess with your amended budget any other way?
No, sir. They were consistent with your leadership.
As they should be. So let me ask, though, Colonel, I do have a serious question about 39.4.4. My understanding from reading some of the documents, and it's not abundantly clear, but from reading back to these documents, we had an initial fusion for phase one of this project at 416,000 thereabout.
That's correct, sir.
And my understanding is that is now in the base already. So the money is based because it wasn't one-time funds. And so is the 1.5 inclusive? Is it in addition to that? And
It's an addition to,
Okay.
and that's the reason why it was done in a phased-in approach, because as you put the infrastructure in place, then you have to pay over time the management of GTA of the system. So the second phase of it finishes out that infrastructure, and then the speed aspect is turning up the volume from 3 to 20. Why that's important to us, we've experienced both in our deployments for tornadoes and for hurricanes, particularly in our comm centers, that the speed aspect, when you send 100 to 200 troopers into a system, they end up overloading that system. And so finishing out that infrastructure and then turning up the volume of speed helps us not overturn that capacity.
But just so we're clear, we're talking about your internet network capacity. Is that?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
That's
so,
correct.
And so my question to you then, Colonel, is how long is this going to be operable? What is the horizon, if you will, on the optimal use of the money, and also building this network out through phase 2 with the 1.5 million?
From this point forward, I'm not an IT guy. That's one of the reasons why you move to GTA for that expertise. The infrastructure that we've seen, normally when we involve servers and routers, there is a refreshment that usually occurs on a 5-year schedule. Okay. And then if you don't do it at that 5-year, what you can do is you can short sheet that by purchasing essentially an extended warranty, which pushes it out for whatever you contract for. So we're moving away from that management internally to turning that over to GTA and their expertise. And the fact of the matter is you pay for that. You pay for that essentially as a subscriber to them doing that for you.
So we really need to pull this out of Chairman Nimmer's budget, I think, is what we need to do. I think management fees go in there, so it's an interagency transfer. But to be sure, I mean, the reason why I'm asking, Colonel, is I want to make sure that when we're making this expenditure, that, first of all, counts for the capacity you need. Secondarily, is a prudent use of the resource, given that we are transitioning as a society into a more mobile network and less fiber in a sense. So making sure that what you're planning for here in this phase is compatible with where the technology is moving, so that it's adequate for your post and for your personnel.
Hence the reason of turning to the experts. You can do this in-house, or you can
Who are those again?
The Georgia Technology Authority. Now, I know that there's been a reputation in the past, but what I've experienced with them is an excellent return and an excellent partnership. If you've been to their facility.
Can I put you under oath for that?
Yeah, absolutely. I wouldn't be going this direction if I didn't feel that. You know me and my firm handshake.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But if you've seen what GTA has done in particular, and one of the reasons, the major reason for this, not only is the speed aspect, but the security of the network. The information that we deal in through NCI and GCIC and other databases that we use is protected information. It's not information that you want hacked into or you want the public to be accessible to it. And so if you've seen the steps that GTA has taken towards that security, it's one of the reasons why we're moving to their management. If you've had an opportunity to actually tour their facility up in Alpharetta, it's worth your time to see what they've done.
And those speeds are going to be adequate, the speeds that you're contracting for with GTA.
Right now, but as you know, time moves on.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much for your presentation, Colonel. Any questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, we thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, sir.
And so the next on the agenda, we have the Firefighters Training Council. Gordon Henderson is here, the director. Thank you for joining us, Director. We're glad to see you. How are things in Rome?
Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to appear, and members of the committee also.
Did you commute down with Chairwoman Dempsey, or did you? Good to see you. Come on.
We're asking for 2 additions to the budget. One is for an additional employee to be added at the amount of $70,000 that includes salary and benefits and is ongoing. This person would deal with, and thank y'all very much for the fireworks tax money. We plan to put it to good use. We deal with the grants that money is intended to be used for, and managing those grants and doing some of the investigations and stuff that go with it. They would also be dealing with some of the concerns and issues that we have and will have coming.
Let me jump in, Director. I'm sorry. Members of the committee, the Director has given to us, you have a handout in front of you, so he is speaking not from the budget per se, beyond the fireworks and money, but he'll also be talking from his request here on the paper. Thank you.
Okay. But anyway, be dealing with the cancer insurance and and working with the departments and that need the help with to obtain that insurance and then point them in the right directions and things like that. We're also asking for $200,000 to institute a program to pay for the people that do our and the fire academies validations on the 31 odd certifications that we do. Each time that course is changed and each time the test bank's changed, we have to revalidate everything. That's part of that money will be used for that. Once everything's validated, then we'll go out to actually testing. We perform normally around 12,000 tests a year. That jumps up and down. I think in 2014 we did 19,000 tests. In 2016, I think it was, we did just a little under 10,000 tests. So it'll move around a little bit, but we also have to do skills testing, and the skills testing has to have, normally you have to have a minimum of 5 people to do the skills test. Some of the testing you can do with less people, some more. If you're doing hazardous material certification testing, then you have to have upwards of 9 to 10 people in doing that. So we want to pay the proctors, monitors, and the evaluators at least enough money for their time to come out and do the things they do and their expense at doing it. Now, what's been happening since about 2008, this is an ongoing program that has been going since then, and what's been happening since then is the fire departments have been furnishing those people. Now, over time, the good points and bad points to that. A lot of times the department will use their own evaluators to evaluate their people, and sometimes that's not good. So we want more control over that. In addition to paying them, what we're doing right now as we speak is we're retraining all the evaluators, monitors, and proctors in the state and adding new ones. And we're requiring them to do so many a year. We're requiring them to do 3 a year. 2 outside the department, 1 inside the department. Now they can do more, but they have to do that. We're also issuing them IDs that tells them they actually represent us and what they're qualified to evaluate or what they're qualified to do. So we want to get more control over that program. It's a very necessary program in our testing procedures, and that's the reason we're asking for the money.
Thank you, Director. Any questions from members of the committee? And we have, and Mr. Rogers had to leave. He had an appointment at 4 o'clock, so he's gone to his office, and as soon as he can get back, he'll join us.
Okay.
I see no questions. I appreciate you being here, Director. Thank you for the request, and thank you for the handout you gave to us with the sheet with those additional requests.
Okay, thank you.
Appreciate it. Next on the agenda is the Georgia Peace Officer Standards Training Council. Ken Vance is the Executive Director of POST, and I'm going to ask to divide the time between you, Ken, and Frank Rotundo, the Executive Director of the Georgia Chief of Police. Please, if you will, look right down in the next section. 39.7 is your budget, has those outlined there for you, and there are 2 items that are listed in the budget. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir, Chairman Welch and committee members, and thank y'all for what y'all do for law enforcement in Georgia. I really appreciate that. As the chairman said, there are really only 2 issues here. Look, folks, y'all been real good to post the last 3 or 4 years, and I appreciate it. We're not asking for a thing. The issue that Mr. Rotundo is going to speak on is a pass-through item for us, and he'll speak to that. To that. But y'all been very nice to us for the last 3 or 4 years, and I just want to say thank you. Other than that, Mr. Chairman, I'm eliminating funds.
You did hire a gentleman to come in last year.
Yes, sir.
We
had
talked
a
about
curriculum
this.
specialist. Yes, sir.
Would you just speak on him for just a minute?
Yes, sir. He is there. He was the curriculum specialist for the state of South Carolina. We were able to hire him away. He is getting ready now to go around the state and start doing testing in law enforcement for law enforcement officers in the state of Georgia. That's why we wanted it. He is a nationally recognized figure in testing in law enforcement area, and we are so glad to have him. And thank y'all for that.
And the committee, when we voted the budget out last year, we initiated as a one-time contract position. Was the discussion that I had with the executive director. The Senate took the one-time out. It is a position now, but I would just ask that we continue to look at this position, and I know that he's working with you, and he's got a lot of work he has ahead of him, and so the executive director has asked us to allow that position to stay in, yes, contrary to the House's original position, or this committee's original position, to stay in because he has not yet completed the work that he has to do.
Sir, we would not have been able to get someone of this caliber for 1 year. And what I will do for you and the committee members is give y'all an update, a quarterly update of where we are and what we're doing in that position, so you'll have an idea of where we're going and what we're doing. I
think just the annual update will be fine, unless members desire more frequent updates than that.
Just let me know.
Okay.
Just let me know.
Annual's good. Thank you, sir, very much for your time.
All right.
And thank you for what POST does to make sure that everybody's certified and properly trained. Executive Director of our Georgia Chiefs of Police, Frank Rotundo, thank you for joining us. And you have a line item in here, I believe it at 39.7.6, if I'm correct.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Yes, my name is Frank Vincent Rotundo. I'm the Executive Director of the Georgia Association of Chiefs of Police and have been so since 1996. I do have a line item in here. It's the first adjustment that we've made in the amount of money that the state gives us to reimburse and to provide training to heads of law enforcement agency under 35820 and 35820.1. Those are the 2 code sections to where we give in-service training and we give basic mandated training for heads of law enforcement agencies. The amount of money reflected in my documents is $285,000. $116,054. I provided backup paperwork to the chairman a little while ago, and hopefully he's distributed it to the members. If not, I could certainly make sure that you have copies of it. And it justifies basically the line item breakdown as we give post-council when we disperse those funds. So post-council is the overseer of the money for the association, and they do a good job making sure that they count everything. Last year, you were kind enough to put some money in the budget, but it did get cut out at the Senate side, and I appreciated you doing it. I would appreciate it if you took this whole amount and proceeded forward with it. This time, I went just a little bit different. I asked the governor's office to look at it. The governor's office looked at it very carefully. They vetted it, and they came down with this amount of money would get us to something palatable to provide the training to police chiefs. I provided correspondence, and I also have, if the chairman cares, a complete breakdown of the budgeted amount of money.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Director. We appreciate that. Yes, and this committee did hear from you in detail last year regarding this very modest request to offset the cost of training our chiefs. And we saw fit to put that amount in. It was removed toward the end of the budgetary process last year, and I think it would be fitting to try to move forward with this again and try once more to see if we can't get that to your chiefs. But I appreciate the presentation and the information here. Are there any questions from members of the committee? Okay. Seeing none, we thank you very much for being here today.
I thank you also, and I sort of parrot the words that my counterparts say. Thank you very much for supporting law enforcement.
Yes. Next on our, and finally on our list of presenters is going to be Public Safety Training Center. We have Chris Wigington, the director, and Cindy Jones, the comptroller, and about as close as a neighbor as I can have, I think, with staff. It's good to see you. She's a Henry Countyan. Glad to see you here, Cindy, and if you could, we'll just proceed on to your request.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman, committee members. I'll move straight down to 39.8.4. It is asking for an increase for 5 positions for the CIT program. When we came to you last year, this was a new program. We asked for 10 positions to see how that would work, the expansion of the program throughout the state to saturate the law enforcement community. We could tell pretty quickly that those 10 instructors, at the rate they were instructing, would not be sufficient. That's why we've come back and asked for the 5 additional positions. Not only are they teaching the 40-hour crisis intervention training, but they're doing an 8-hour mental health first aid class. And then there's never been a refresher curriculum developed or delivered for people that started taking the CIT program back in 2005.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Representative Chairman Ballinger.
Thank you, Chairman Welch. I just had a question about that. I know that Chairman Hitchens has been efforting something that would provide some support to law enforcement and first responders. How does all that kind of tie in together? Can you speak to that?
It is 2 different things. That program is actually assistance that Colonel Hitchens is working on, Representative Hitchens is working on, is for the public safety professional themselves. If they've been involved in a traumatic event. This training trains the individual officer or first responder to deal with the citizen that might be going through a crisis.
Okay. All right.
So
Thank you.
You kind of see what how I'm explaining.
Well, they're similar.
They are very similar,
but
that program deals with the first responder specifically that might not talk to a mental health provider or a counselor or a psychiatrist, where they might talk with another first responder, where this program is dealing with the first responder that's out dealing with the citizen population.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's a great question, because it was in need of clarification, and I appreciate Chairman Ballinger asking that question. And to follow up on that, my understanding is that the CIT is also there to help train officers so that they're better prepared to help to de-escalate situations. And my understanding also is that that our public safety departments, in part because of the training that you're providing, has been on the leading edge of de-escalation well before the feds had started more or less mandating a look back at de-escalation when it comes to the engagement between law enforcement and the public. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir, that is fair to say. And a great portion of this is de-escalation. So many of you know with criminal justice and the prison system and the jail population, the majority of that population is dealing with some type of mental illness. A lot of times you could divert that individual. If they've committed a criminal act, the officer still has to do their job and take them to the local jail, or they might end up in prison. But sometimes you can recognize symptoms where they might not have committed a criminal act at that time, and you can divert them to a mental health facility or treatment instead of just taking them to the jail for it becoming a war of words on the side of the road, or a domestic dispute, or a simple call at a mall or a shopping center.
Well, and I think that you've had federal officers coming down to see how we're training.
That is correct. Yes.
To do cross training with federal officers as a result of your training center. Is that fair?
That is, yes, sir.
I do have a question about the vehicles, and this is more of a comment, and it's not directed at you specifically, Director, but we did receive in our amended budget and then this budget, we did receive in our amended budget requests for vehicles or equipment that were associated with employees to be then put into the big budget. So we had an amended budget request for cars, for example, for the CIT instructors. I think 5 cars, if I remember correctly. Sir. And just as I think that it's arguably presumptuous to say that this committee or in the House and the Senate would approve the positions and thereby putting cars into the amended budget that then presuppose that we'll actually fill them with people. And so as a comment back, I think that it would be prudent to not decouple those items, because then it places us into kind of a quandary of approving one with the expectation we'll fill it. So we're gonna approve desks for personnel, and then we're supposed to put people in them. And so just as a kind of a comment back to OPB and the governor's office, I would just make that suggestion that we not get into the habit of doing that.
Yes, sir.
But otherwise, I understand the request, and I appreciate the time and energy that you're putting into training our officers and law enforcement across the state, both state level and local. Any other questions from members of the committee? Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here, Director. We have some those that signed up for some public comments related to the budget itself as it's been published. These are not extraneous items. I'd like them to focus on items that are in the budget that we have seen today, presented today, and I have my boss is calling. I'm going to have to suffer the consequences of that. Yeah. No. So, and that's got me derailed me completely. About that. Helen Sloat with Together Georgia. Awana Stedman also with Together Georgia. I assume that you're talking on the same topic. Is that correct? Is there anyone else that is speaking on the same topic that would like to join you, or is it separate? Okay. And Scott Merritt, if you would come to the podium and then just direct us to this particular item in the budget that you were to speak on, and then we'll go from there. And so this will be in the is it in the Department of Juvenile Justice? So is that 32? 31.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm Helen Sloat, and I'm with Nelson Mullins, Riley, and Scarborough. And here today, I'm on behalf of Together
31,
Georgia.
yeah.
And I'd like to draw your attention to the community services portion of the Department of Juvenile Justice budget. It's 31.1.6. And there's an amount in there that the governor's office has proposed of $531,810. First of all, I'd love to say that we are delighted about the work that the governor has done on child welfare reform over the years that he's been governor. We are very appreciative of all that hard work, and we are very appreciative of this committee and the work it has done to help make the lives of children in Georgia better. So thank you. So I'm going to step back and do a little history here. Over the summer...
How far back?
Not far. I'm going to be really quick. Over the summer, the Department of Human Services recommended to the governor's office that they increase child welfare rates to 7% for the child caring institution and child placing agencies. And when the governor proposed his budget to you all, it came out at 2.5%. And we would love to see that rate moved back to 7%, which I believe, my math is terrible, I think is around $1.2 million if you were to take it to the 7%. So today I have with me some great providers that are on the front lines, and I have Judge Stedman here that would like to try to just make a few remarks. So I'd like to turn this over to Scott Merritt.
Thank you very much for your time. My name is Scott Merritt. I'm the president and CEO of Murphy Harps Children's Center in Cedartown, and we operate a child care institution or a residential program, a foster care program, and a transitional living program. And as Helen was saying, I too appreciate what the governor has done and this committee has done over the years to benefit child welfare. Unfortunately, we in the residential program has not received the funding that we need to do the work that we have been asked to do. Right now, our revenue only covers about 80% of our expenses. And as a result of that, we've had a number of providers either close their residential programs or they have completely gone out of business. And as a result, as you all know, we have more kids living in hotels, which according to an article in the Gainesville Times is $1,000 per day. We have more kids having to stay in psychiatric residential treatment programs because there's not a place to step them down. AmeriGroup does not pay for that once they do not meet medical necessity. Therefore, the state has to pay those funds. So by having no beds for these kids to go to, the state is actually having to spend more money when they could give us the rates that we need to do the work that we're doing. The other issue that I wanted to focus on today, I know you all have been given so many numbers over the past several weeks that you've been in session, but I want to provide a human factor to this debate, and that is our staff. There's basically what I call three S's that are indicators of a quality program, and the first is staff. And our staff is having to do some very difficult work. As a maximum watchful oversight provider, we work with very, very difficult kids. We work with kids who have been kicked out of foster care programs, group homes, and so forth. So our staff really have a challenge before them, but they see it as a rewarding challenge. The only problem is that we're not able to pay them what they deserve. A number of providers, including Murphy Harps, have staff that cannot afford health insurance because they just can't afford either the amount taken out of their check or they couldn't afford the deductible if they did have the health insurance. Some of them are on public assistance. So when you have staff basically financially poor, it's hard for them to be happy about their job. It's hard for them to be able to focus on the kids. It's hard for them to keep the kids safe, which is the second S, and that's safety. The quality of a program, you have to keep the kids safe. And to keep the kids safe, you have to have good staff. And to have good staff, you have to be able to pay them what they deserve, especially when you're having to compete against industries, fast food restaurants, and you can't keep your positions filled. And then the last S that I consider a quality program is services. And we've got to be able to provide the services to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Mr. Williams, I'd love for you to come to Murphy Harps, and I could spend all day talking to you about kids that we work with from the Department of Juvenile Justice who have a long rap sheet, if you want to use that word, who have turned their lives around. In fact, we have 3 that are working at Stonecrest Mall. If you'd met them when they first came into Murphy Harps, you'd have never thought that they would be at this point in their lives, getting their high school diploma, having an apartment, having benefits. But we were not able to do that if it weren't for the services that we provided. And a lot of providers are having to cut those services to make up their budget. So I'll leave you with that. Again, I thank you for what you have done, and I really hope that you will consider moving our rate adjustment back from 2.5% back to 7%. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
Good afternoon. My name is Allison Evans, and I'm the CEO of the Methodist Home of South Georgia. We have a campus in Macon. We have a campus in Columbus, Waverly Hall, Americus, Valdosta, and St. Mary's. So kind of the South Georgia market there. And one of the reasons I'm here is because of the encouragement of Representative Ballinger, who said, come speak to us and tell us what's going on. I echo what Scott said, and I'm not going to repeat it. The Methodist Home, faith-based organization, and we actually have a small percentage of GJJ kids. But the reality is, when they come into our care, you can't tell them apart. And you previously heard from the commissioner who said, when these kids come out of the detention centers, we want them to step down into communities, and the communities and neighborhoods have changed. And places like ours are great places for these kids to step down to. But the reality is, it takes the resources to make sure that we're caring for them and helping them transition to become productive citizens. Thank you for your support and your interest. Judge Stedman.
Thank you. I will not be as long-winded as judges usually are, so you're in luck. I am here because I have not spent as many years as Commissioner Niles in child welfare, but I've spent a large number of years. And 16 of those years was on the bench as a juvenile court judge in Cobb County. So I became the executive director of Together Georgia because I truly believe in what these folks and the other providers do. And what they do is they truly provide an alternative for children to not have to go into a youth detention center, to not have to be hoteled or whatever's needed, because these are not the children that would be placed in a foster home. These are children who often need specialized care. They're children who have disrupted other placements. They're children that need a place to be able to then become successful, what I like to always say, tax-paying citizens, and I truly believe that we can do that. But what I've learned in my short time in this job since August, is how limited it is for them to be able to do it when they do not have the funds to do it. And I have certainly reaped the benefit in those 16 years of this committee, and I've reaped the benefit of criminal justice reform. I reaped the benefit of child welfare reform. I've watched the difference that we're doing in our state for children. But I believe that the folks that I represent truly are working with the most vulnerable children in the state of Georgia. These are the children that otherwise would be at a youth detention center, or otherwise would possibly, if they don't get the right placement and the right services and the right care, will be on that fast track to prison. And that's what all of you, I know I'm preaching to the choir as I say this, but that's certainly what all of us want to prevent, and I believe that our providers do it. So you've got the numbers. We can certainly provide other numbers. I've spoken to many of you, and so I'm available and will always be available to you or to this committee. Do you have any questions?
As a matter of fact, we do.
Oh, goodness.
Representative Williams, they didn't say Hinesville on that list, I noticed.
I know. We're going to work on that. Thank you, and Scott, and each of you, Judge, for what all of you do. And I know it's difficult when you kind of get what you think is shortchanged, and you have to ask for it, and then you're kind of on a tightrope. You want to ask respectfully, but you don't want to pick anybody off and get cut more. It's difficult, but I'll be very honest with you. I've always felt like this, that you are heroes on the same level as our law enforcement, because you're the folk that you have to really do it. You have to deal with it every day. And sometimes, because you are kind of under the radar, we don't celebrate those who have literally given their lives to making things better. And I want to personally thank you for what you do. You're truly my heroes.
They are, and that's the reason that it's such a great opportunity for me to be able to represent them as their executive director. Thank you, Representative.
And I heard that Representative Williams will then be making some charitable donations from his campaign fund.
Well, they all
to
take
his
them, so
heroes.
don't, we won't pass a basket. We won't do the Baptist church thing, but.
I'm a Baptist. We use the collection.
Not one. We won't pass it one time. It might be multiple times.
Good.
Thank you very much for being here. There are
Thank
no other
you.
questions. We appreciate your testimony. We appreciate the service that you're providing to the state. we appreciate the guidance and watchful oversight that you provide the children of the state. So thank you very much.
Thank you for giving us this opportunity. Thank you.
With that, committee members, just as a heads up, we will have a meeting at 4 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. I think it's at 4:06. We've been trying to push. Is that right? I think it's 4:06. Let me double check that.
Terry and I showed up at 1 o'clock.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, Terry was calling me. Where are you?
Where
Oh, that's probably my fault. I probably meant that. So it is 4:06 CLOB tomorrow at 4 o'clock, and we will wind up and conclude. We have 4 agencies to hear from, and then we will we'll go from there and try to hammer this thing out.
Great.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Appreciate it. Thank you. We are adjourned.